Howdy folks, and welcome back to another episode, I know it has been a while, of Home with the Gnome. My apologies, but well, these videos are actually quite complicated to make, especially if you're doing them solo. For example, right now, I have no idea what this is actually going to look like, because there's nobody on the other side of the camera. So, yeah, anyway, enough excuses. Today, I'm going to be cooking, well, it could be a chili, it could be a stew, it could be a jambalaya. It's mostly going to be a chili, but it could be any one of those three things depending on what steps you take during the cooking process. And if that sounds confusing, it shouldn't be, and all will become clear as we get into it. For now, we're going to start off by taking a look at the ingredients. The thing I love about making chilies, and honestly I could eat a chili every day, is that the choice of ingredients is largely open to interpretation, or use whatever you've got. Today I'm going to be using minced beef. Normally when I do a chili I use chunks of beef steak or chunks of diced pork. But like I said, today I'm using what I've got. So 12% fat minced beef. The amount of fat in the beef isn't too important, it's just going to dictate how long you have to brown the mince for in the pan as you cook it in order to boil off all the fat first. The lower the fat percentage, the quicker that is going to take. I've also got some chorizo sausage because I'm just using whatever I've got. I'm going to be grinding my own chili spices. I have some Chipotle Morita chilies here and an Aja Red. But if you don't have dried chilies, by all means, go ahead and just use chili powder. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. To bulk it up, I'm going to be using chopped tomatoes, which I'm going to run through the blender. Kidney beans. I like putting beans in my chili, although I realise this is something of a controversial choice and has been known to start fights. I'm not entirely sure why. If you don't want to put beans in your chili, don't put beans in your chili. I use kidney beans because I've got them, but you could also use black-eyed beans, pinto beans, whatever you like. They're just there to add a little bit of bulk, and I just happen to like the texture. For extra flavour, I'm going to be using an onion, 3 lemons, some garlic. We're going to be deglazing with a bit of red wine, although you don't have to use red wine. You could use beer, you could use water. I just like the flavour of red wine, and it gives me an excuse to drink a glass while I'm doing the cooking. And that is more or less it, with one exception, of course, I forgot to mention. At the back there we've got a can of chicken stock. Right, here's where the magic happens. First thing we're going to do is brown off the minced beef. Choice of meat is completely irrelevant. I'm using minced beef because I've got some and it needed using. You can use pork, you can use chicken, you can use cubed beef, cubed pork. You don't have to use meat at all. Nothing wrong with a vegetable chili. Now this is going into a reasonably hot pan. It's not going to stay hot, however. All I'm going to do is brown this off. Now, as this heats up, it's going to release the moisture in the mince. That's where all the fat's going to go. You can see the fat starting to boil off there. And yes, there's a lot of stuff burning and sticking to the bottom of the pan. Don't worry about that. That's called fond. We're going to be using that later and freeing it up by deglazing using some red wine. That stuff is basically pure flavour. Scrape as much of it up as you like with the I mean, this is the reason why I like to use a wooden spatula. It's just better for scraping up all of the fond from the bottom of the pot. If you don't have a wooden spatula, you can use a silicone spatula, but I recommend you get a wooden spatula. They're not expensive. Now this beef hadn't completely defrosted, despite being left out on the kitchen counter for 5 hours, because of course it's bloody freezing around here. And so room temperature until I started turning things like the oven on, was about 8 degrees. That's Celsius, for those of you watching in the colonies. All we're doing here is we're browning off the meat, and then we're waiting for when that fat has boiled off and most of the moisture is gone, and we start to get that fond build up on the base of the pan again. Okay, so we'll be back when that happens. We're now at the stage where all of the moisture from the minced beef that's been released as it heated up has now burnt off. If you're not paying attention, you'll know, because the pan will suddenly start sizzling again. You can see at the bottom of the pan, all the burnt bits, that's the fond. What we're going to do now, because we don't want that stuck to the bottom of the pan, we want that in the meal, because that's pure flavour. So what we're going to do now is deglazing. Now, if you don't know what that is, don't worry. It's just a fancy, posh term that cabbage mechanics use to make whatever they're doing sound more complicated and technical than it really is. I'm going to be using red wine to deglaze. You don't have to use red wine. You can use beer. You can use water. But I just like the flavour that red wine adds to it. Add a generous amount. And then drink the rest yourself. And what that's going to do, when we stir it around, is it's going to take all of that fond off the bottom of the pan and mix it back in. Because we don't want to lose that stuff. That's pure flavour. And once the wine has boiled off, it's time to add the rest of the ingredients. A couple of minutes later, you can see how a lot of the wine has already either been absorbed by the mince or has boiled off. Now, opinion is divided, if you're going to use wine, on what kind of wine you should use as a deglazing agent. Personally, I think that you should use wine that you would drink if you weren't using it as a deglazing agent, because it's a flavour that you're adding to the meal that you're going to eat. And if it's not wine that you would drink anyway, why would you add it to something that you're going to eat? However, your mileage may vary. It doesn't have to be an expensive wine. In fact, it probably shouldn't be an expensive wine, but it should, at least in my opinion, be something that you would be quite happy to drink anyway. As you can see, I am. Okay, the wine that we used to deglaze the fond from the bottom of the pan has almost either been absorbed into the mince or evaporated off. And because we don't want to have to deglaze again, we're going to have to start adding the rest of the ingredients very soon. Here are the dried chilies that I ground. If you don't have dried chilies, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with using bottled chili powder. The only benefit of using dried chilies compared to bottled chili powder is the dried chilies, they retain their flavour for much longer. If you have a bottled chili powder for 3 months or longer, it's going to start to lose its flavour. You don't get that problem with dried chilies. Dried chilies? Sorry, dried chilies. So that's that. To that, I'm going to add the lemon juice. So that's the juice of 3 lemons. You can use more if you want. It depends on the size of your lemons. I find if you use more than 3, the lemon flavour can tend to get a little bit overpowering. If that's what you're going for, then by all means use more than 3. But if you want the flavours to be balanced, 3 average sized lemons, no more. Or limes, if that's what you've got. So this is going to go straight in. Already that's adding a lovely bit of colour. I'm doing this at this stage because I want that lemon flavour to be soaked up by the beef mince. Now we don't have a lot of time for this to happen because we're still cooking on a medium-high heat, and it's not adding a huge amount of moisture to something that was about almost ready to need deglazing again. But trust me, this smells fantastic. And it's going to taste even better. Okay, I think that has just about been absorbed by the mince. So it's time to add the rest of the ingredients. Now, if you're like me and you're weird and you don't actually like the texture of onions, you should still cook with onions, because onions, even if you can't taste the flavour because you're not using many onions, and I'm only using one for this, onions act as a flavour enhancer. They bring out the flavour of everything else in the same dish. So even if you don't like onions, you probably should try to find some way of cooking with them. And for me, that means blending them in a food blender with the garlic and the chopped tomatoes. This is all going to go in now. And that's going to add some bulk and flavour, obviously, to the dish. The thing is, that's already pretty thick. And if we're going to leave this to cook for 3 or 4 hours, and we are, that's going to dry off very, very quickly. And that is why we add the chicken stock. Canned chicken stock. No, I've never seen that before either. But chicken stock is chicken stock. If you don't have chicken stock, just add water. It's not going to taste the same. But if you don't have it, by all means just use water. Okay, now that's good and moist. And that's not an expression you thought you'd ever be hearing on a cooking show. There are still a couple of extra things that we need to add at this point, purely for additional flavour and texture. And in the case of today's dish, those two things are kidney beans. I realise that adding beans to a chili is something of a controversial issue and a subject that has been known to start the occasional online fight. If you object to beans in your chili, just don't add them. But I like them, so I'm adding them to my chili. The final thing that I'm adding is chorizo sausage. Now this is not typically the sort of thing that you would see anybody adding to a chili. But the thing is, chorizo tastes really good. And I've got a load of chorizo, so it's going in the chili. And that's the thing about a chili. Actually, it's the thing about a curry as well. You see, dishes like this are the kind of dishes that were made by peasants to salvage stuff that really didn't taste very good in the first place. Now, if you can add stuff that does taste very good in the first place, it's so much the better. But the point is that there isn't really any one chili recipe. Use whatever you like the taste of, and you will not regret it. Now at this point we're going to have to make a choice. Normally when you're cooking a chili like this, you would turn it down to a low heat, which is what I am going to do. And if you were using like chuck steak, or as we call it here in Britain, braising steak, you want that to cook for hours because it's not a particularly good cut of beef. It's kind of tough and not very tender. So you cook it for hours in order to break the textures down and make it a tender cut. At the same time, you want to boil off most of this moisture so you end up with something that actually has a chili consistency. So you would leave the pot uncovered. Uncovered for 3 to 4 hours. Turn up every half hour to give it a stir. What I'm going to do, on the other hand, is I'm going to cover it. Now that's going to do two things. Let me just find the lid. And there we go. Now, covering it is going to do two things. It's going to stop the moisture from evaporating, so it's not going to reduce down. It's not going to thicken. It's going to seal all of the moisture in the pot. It's also going to increase the pressure in the pot, and with increased pressure comes increased heat, so it's actually going to cook a little bit faster. But I'm mostly doing this because I want to seal in all of that moisture. So at the end of a 3 to 4 hour cooking period, it's still going to have the same level inside the pot, and most of the moisture is still going to be in there. The other thing that's going to happen is that chorizo, as it cooks, is going to release a lot of oil. Now you've got two ways of dealing with that. You can either spoon that oil off, which is a kind of laborious and messy process. And why would you want to do that anyway? Because chorizo oil tastes good. Or you can introduce something that's going to not only absorb all of that moisture, but it's also going to soak up all of the flavors from all of the stuff like the chorizo oil and all of that chili infused moisture that's kept in the pot by cooking it off with the lid on. And for that, I'm going to be using rice, which is basically what's going to turn this chili into a jambalaya. 2 hours later, here's an example of exactly what I'm talking about. I've just taken the lid off, and there's our chili. If I'd cooked this even on low heat for 2 hours with the lid off, most of that would have reduced down. You see all of the orange oil? That's from the chorizo. But like I said, don't worry, that stuff tastes amazing. And whereas you'd normally have to find some way of separating the oil from the chili, because we're going to add rice and basically turn this into a chili chorizo jambalaya, the rice is going to soak all of that oil up and all of the flavor from the oil, as well as helping to thicken everything up, because at the moment it's the consistency of a stew. And if that's what you're aiming for, that's fine, but that's not what we want in this case. So I'm going to put the lid back on, and we'll be back in another hour and a half to add the rice. Around about an hour later, not an awful lot has changed because we've kept the lid on. Going to give it a quick stir. Still a lot of free oil from the chorizo floating around in there. But now we're going to take care of that. By adding the rice. This for me is always the tricky part, because I don't really cook rice that often, and this is of course going to cook the rice, and I often miscalculate how much rice to add in order to absorb a given amount of moisture. But this will take about 15-20 minutes. and it will look very, very different when we come back. That rice should absorb most of that moisture and turn this into a nice thick but still juicy and full of the flavour, because the only thing that's boiled off is the moisture. All of the flavours from the spices and the lemon is still in there, and the rice is going to suck it all up. And that's the theory. Still on the low heat, and it's going to cool down a little now because we no longer have the pot lid on top. So, well, we'll come back in 15 minutes and see. As usual, we're calling upon the services of a Portuguese judge.
Yes, it's been a while.
Well, it has. It's been a while since we did a video. It's not been a while since you ate that, since
No.
I do it about 3-4 times a week.
It's been chili galore, but every chili has been very different and
Yes.
it has been very nice.
That's the trick. I don't think I've ever cooked a chili the same way twice.
Mm-hmm.
You just use whatever you have and you get a different flavour.
I like how sometimes lemony it can get.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do like using lemons. You see, this is the thing, because all of the other... Go on, put it in your mouth.
Oh.
It's a bit spicier than usual.
1 second, because I just brushed my teeth. I need that. I can definitely feel the spiciness.
See, normally I use braising steak or diced pork. This time I'm using mince, because I had mince and I needed to use it.
I didn't even know I was in the mood for spicy.
Yeah. Well, and instead of using
really
chili
good.
powder this time, I did what I used to do at first, and I actually ground my own spices from dried chilies. But that's the thing. I mean, I've done that Perco Pibil from the binging with Babish stuff. That was from Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and I followed the recipe for that. And then I did Kevin's famous chili from The Office, again from binging with Babish's recipe, and I followed the recipe for that. And following the recipes is great, because that's what recipes are for.
It's predictable. You know,
yeah, if you don't know how to do something, the recipe shows you how to do it.
Yeah.
But once you do know how to do something, you can start to experiment.
Playing around, yeah.
And doing things according to the way you like the taste. Which is why I've never cooked the same chili twice.
You use 1 lemon?
3, but they're
3
small.
lemons. Alright. Small ones, okay. Okay. Because I feel some lemony taste there, but not as strong as last time.
Yeah.
And you used 3 big ones, wasn't it?
Yes. Because the last time I did this, it wasn't very spicy, but it was very lemony. And this time there's chorizo in there, but all the chorizo oil has been absorbed by the rice. So the rice is really tasty.
It is. It really is. I also like that the spiciness is just stingly and it's not growing on my tongue.
Yeah.
I like that very much.
So that's a combination of, I mean, use whatever spices you like, whatever you've got. If you don't have dried spices, then use bottled spices, but dried spices are better. I use chipotle maritas and anaja red. So there should be a smoky aftertaste with the spices of the chili.
I need to make more of these.
Okay.
Please.
I can't guarantee it'll be exactly the same the next time.
Oh, it's really good. Really, really good.
So that's my chili / stew / jambalaya.
Jingalaya.
Yeah, my Jingalaya. There we go, there's the title of the video. Thank you, Rita.
You should hire me for marketing.
Yeah, you're not just a pretty face. Oh, anyway, glad you enjoy it. There's plenty left for later, although there might not be much left after I've had some. That amount of food that I created will probably feed 4 people, or 1 Eddie.
It's really good. Really, really good.
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one, and feel free to mess around with the ingredients yourself. Add some jalapeno peppers, add whatever you've got, and just cook the food that you like. And take care, and I'll catch you next time.